There are certain moments of suburban tranquility so pure, so profoundly peaceful, they feel like they should be painted on the side of a collector's plate. This was one of them. I was reclined on my patio deck, the wood warm beneath my bare feet, a mug of perfectly brewed coffee steaming in my hand. The air smelled of yesterday's rain and the freshly mown lawn of my neighbor to the left, Dave, a good man who understood the sacred Saturday morning covenant of not firing up a leaf blower before 10 a.m. A gentle breeze rustled the oak tree in my backyard. It was my kingdom, a modest quarter-acre of peaceful, beige-sided monarchy, and I was its benevolent, coffee-sipping king. This perfect, shimmering bubble of bliss was popped by the sight of a piece of paper taped to my front door. Now I know what you're thinking. A flyer for a pizza place? A notice from the gas company? No. This paper was different. It was crisp, a heavy bond cardstock that screamed official business. The tape wasn't cheap Scotch tape. It was that clear, heavy-duty packing tape, applied with a precision that bordered on surgical. No good ever comes from surgically applied tape on your front door. I sighed, the peaceful monarch abdicating his throne of patio furniture, and trudged to the front of the house. I peeled the tape off, which took a surprising amount of effort, and read the letter. Sunny Meadows, Homeowners Association. Preserving property values, one bylaw at a time. Official notice of violation. Date, October 15th, 2025. To the occupant of 123 Oak Street from the Sunny Meadows Architectural Review Committee. Bylaw 117, subsection C. Water management and aesthetic integrity. Dear homeowner, it has been brought to the attention of the committee that a persistent and unsightly drip has been observed originating from the gutter downspout on the eastern-facing facade of your property. This constitutes a violation of Bylaw 117C, which mandates that all water diversion systems be maintained in a state of good repair and visual congruity with the community's established aesthetic standards. You are hereby required to rectify this issue within 14 calendar days of the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in an initial fine of $50, followed by subsequent fines of $25 per day until the violation is resolved. Sincerely, Carol Peterson, President, Sunny Meadows HOA. I read it twice. Then a third time, just to make sure I hadn't accidentally suffered a stroke and was misreading the word drip for something more serious, like spontaneous grease fire or unlicensed tiger breeding. Nope, drip. I walked to the side of my house, the letter clutched in my hand, like evidence from a crime scene. This was the side that faced Carol's house. Her property was a monument to sterile perfection. Her lawn looked like it was cut with scissors and a level. Her rose bushes were so uniformly pruned they looked like they'd been rendered by a computer. And there, on the corner of my house, was the offending downspout. I watched, I waited, and then drip. A single, minuscule drop of water detached itself from the metal elbow and fell 3 feet to a small, damp patch of dirt below. I timed it. Another drop fell 9 seconds later. Drip. This was the catastrophe. The crisis that had warranted heavy bond cardstock and a formal cease and desist. The unsightly horror that was threatening the very fabric of Sunny Meadows. I walked back inside and called upstairs to my wife. "Sarah, get down here. There's been a disaster of biblical proportions." I heard her footsteps on the stairs. What is it, Mark? Did the raccoon finally figure out the new trash can locks? Worse, I said, holding up the letter with a grim expression. So much worse. We have an unsanctioned moisture event. She took the letter, her eyes scanning it quickly. A slow smile spread across her face. She was trying to hide it, but I knew my wife. She was entertained. Oh no, not a persistent and unsightly drip. The humanity. Don't mock, Sarah. This is serious. This drip, this rogue precipitation, is a direct threat to visual congruity. Did Carol write this? She asked, already knowing the answer. Who else? I said, gesturing vaguely towards the window. Only Carol could make a drop of water sound like a felony. You know, she once tried to write up the Hendersons because their welcome mat was, and I quote, excessively whimsical. So what are you going to do? Sarah asked, handing the letter back. Just caulk the seam? It'll take you 5 minutes. I looked down at the letter, at the smug corporate font, at the perfectly penned signature of Carol Peterson. It wasn't a request from a neighbor, it was a decree from a tin-pot dictator who used bylaws as her scepter. A 5-minute fix felt like surrender. It felt like letting her win. I looked back out the window, at the corner of the house. I saw the downspout. I saw the little damp patch of dirt. The gears in my head, usually reserved for deciding what to grill for dinner or how to best arrange the dishwasher, started turning. They whirred past the simple, logical solution of a tube of sealant and ventured into uncharted, gloriously petty territory. A slow, mischievous grin spread across my face. Sarah saw it, and her own smile faltered. Mark? What are you thinking? I know that look. That's the look you had before you tried to build a brick pizza oven with only YouTube videos for guidance. Shh, I said, holding up a finger. Genius is at work. I looked at the letter one last time. Rectify this issue, it said. It didn't say how. Oh, I'll rectify it, I muttered to the empty room. I'll rectify the hell out of it. The next 48 hours were a blur of what my wife generously called manic research, and what I preferred to call strategic artistic development. My laptop became a portal to a world I never knew existed. I bypassed all search results for how to fix a leaky gutter and plunged headfirst into the digital rabbit hole of DIY backyard water features. My search history was a thing of chaotic beauty. Pondless slate waterfalls, Zen garden soundscapes for beginners, how to wire submersible low-voltage LED lights without electrocuting yourself. My nights were spent on Pinterest, a website I had previously associated only with wedding planning and recipes involving shocking amounts of cream cheese. I was surrounded by images of cascading streams, bubbling fountains, and serene rock gardens. I wasn't just fixing a drip, I was curating an experience. I was crafting a narrative of hydro-aesthetic defiance. By Monday evening, I had my masterpiece. On a piece of printer paper, I had sketched out the plan. It was, I had to admit, a work of art. The drawing showed the offending downspout no longer dripping sadly onto the dirt. Instead, it was being rerouted, decanting its precious water onto the top tier of a magnificent 3-foot-tall multi-layered slate waterfall. The water would then cascade down a series of staggered, artfully placed rocks, gurgling into a hidden basin filled with river stones before being pumped back up to the top in a glorious, never-ending cycle of malicious compliance. The whole affair would be flanked by lush, shade-loving ferns and the pièce de résistance, illuminated by a series of blue and green submersible LED lights. I presented the sketch to Sarah with the gravity of an architect unveiling a new skyscraper. I laid it on the kitchen table. "Behold," I said. She stared at it, her head cocked. She looked at the sketch, then at me, then back at the sketch. A long silence hung in the air. "So," she began slowly, choosing her words with the care of a bomb disposal expert, "your plan to fix a tiny drip is to build a water feature that looks like the lobby of a mid-range casino. It's not a water show, it's a hydro-aesthetic statement," I corrected her gently. "Think of it. The letter says I have to rectify the issue. The issue is an unsightly drip. My solution eliminates the drip by giving it a glorious, beautiful purpose. It will no longer be an unsightly drip. It will be the source of a tranquil, babbling brook. I'm not just fixing a problem, Sarah. I'm upgrading it." "You're upgrading a gutter leak." "Into an artistic installation," I beamed. "One that Carol will be able to see and hear from her kitchen window. Every single day. It's the opposite of a problem. It's an amenity." She stared at the drawing again. Then finally, a laugh escaped her lips. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated surrender. "You're insane. You know that, right?" "Insanely brilliant," I said. "Now, I just need to find a contractor who shares my vision." Finding that contractor proved to be an interesting challenge. The first two guys I called, both reputable gutter and roofing companies, basically hung up on me after I explained the job. The third call was to a number on a beat-up truck I'd seen around the neighborhood. "Gus's handyman services. If it's broke, I'll probably fix it." A gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Gus?" "Hi, Gus. My name is Mark. I have a unique project involving a gutter downspout." "Leaking?" he grunted. "Clogged? Ripped off? In a storm? I've seen it all, pal." "Well, yes, it's leaking," I said. "But I don't want you to stop the leak. I want you to enhance it, to celebrate it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear what sounded like a sandwich being chewed. "You want to celebrate a leak?" "That's the gist of it, yes. It's an HOA-related situation." The chewing stopped. "Say no more. I'll be there in 20. Gus turned out to be exactly what you'd expect from his truck. He was a barrel-chested man in his late 50s with a formidable gray mustache and hands like catcher's mitts. He wore a faded flannel shirt and work boots that looked like they had personally survived several wars. He walked around to the side of the house, took one look at the drip, then looked over at Carol's pristine house. "Ah," he said, a world of understanding in that single syllable. "You got a Carol. You know her?" "Everyone in the trades knows a Carol," he said, stroking his mustache. "So, the dragon lady from the HOA is on your case about a drip." "That's the one?" I confirmed. "And you want to pay me, a man who has built a career on making water go where it's supposed to go, to take this water and make it go where it's not, but in a way that looks like it's on purpose?" "That's a perfect summary," I said, pulling out my sketch. I was thinking slate, river rocks, and mood lighting. Gus stared at my drawing. For a solid minute, he didn't speak. His face was a mask of professional neutrality. I was sure he was about to laugh me off my own property. Then, a slow, magnificent grin spread across his face, revealing a gold tooth. "I'm in," he said, his voice rumbling with amusement. "My price just went up by 20%. I'm charging you an artistic consultation fee." "Deal," I said, shaking his massive hand. Our trip to the home improvement store was a sight to behold. We weren't in the roofing aisle. We were in the garden center, the two of us pushing a cart through a sea of decorative stones and pond liners. No, no, not those rocks, Gus would say, picking up a smooth, gray river stone. You want something with more texture. The water needs to dance off the stone. You hear me? It's about the acoustics. We spent 20 minutes debating the merits of different submersible pumps. I'd grab a small, sensible one. Gus would shake his head. Kid, you're not trying to create a trickle. You're trying to make a statement. You need flow. You need presence. We left with a pump powerful enough to run the Bellagio fountains. The next 2 days, the side of my house became a construction zone. Gus worked with a surprising delicacy for a man his size, excavating a shallow basin, laying down the pond liner, and carefully stacking the heavy pieces of slate. I was his loyal, if clumsy, assistant, hauling bags of river rock and untangling cords for the LED lights. It was a mess of dirt, PVC pipes, and exposed wiring, all in full, glorious view of Carol's house. I saw her twitching her curtains several times. Once, she came out to get her mail and just stood on her driveway, staring at our chaotic operation with an expression of pure, uncomprehending horror. Gus caught her eye and gave her a cheerful wave. She flinched and scurried back inside. She's scared, Gus chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. She doesn't know what it is yet, but she knows it ain't a simple gutter repair. That's the idea, my friend, I said, holding up 2 LED light pucks. Now, do we think the vibe here is more of a cool moonlight blue or an enchanted forest green? Gus squinted, stroking his mustache in thought. Let's do both. By Wednesday evening, our masterpiece was complete. The dirt was raked, the ferns were planted, the last riverstone was placed. All that was left was to flip the switch. Gus had packed up his tools, but he hung around for the grand finale. No way I'm missing the premiere, he'd said, leaning against his truck with a thermos of coffee. We waited for the perfect moment. Not broad daylight, not the pitch black of night, but dusk. That magical cinematic time when the sky is a deep, bruised purple and the first stars are just beginning to peek out. It was showtime. You ready for this? I asked Sarah, who had come out onto the patio, a glass of wine in her hand and a look of deep skepticism on her face. I'm not sure the world is ready for this, Mark, she said, but go ahead. I took a deep breath, walked over to the outdoor outlet, and plugged in the heavy-duty extension cord. The effect was instantaneous and, I have to say, far more spectacular than I had imagined. First, there was a low hum as the oversized pump whirred to life. Then, a gush of water, diverted from the downspout, poured onto the top tier of slate. It wasn't a drip anymore. It was a confident, steady stream. The water cascaded down the stone tiers, splitting and merging, creating a symphony of gentle, burbling, splashing sounds. A moment later, the lights kicked in. The alternating blue and green LEDs illuminated the moving water from below, casting shimmering, dancing patterns on the beige siding of my house. It was glorious. It was absurd. It was a redneck Zen garden, a suburban Niagara Falls, a beacon of belligerent tranquility. It was the most beautiful, ridiculous thing I had ever created. Gus let out a low whistle from the driveway. Well, I'll be damned, he said, a note of genuine pride in his voice. It's something, all right. Sarah just shook her head, a helpless laugh escaping her lips. Oh my God, Mark. It's so much, worse than I pictured. We didn't have to wait long. Like a moth to a gaudily illuminated flame, Carol was drawn to the spectacle. We heard her screen door slide open with a sharp squeak. She appeared on her perfectly manicured lawn, a silhouette against her warmly lit living room window. She stood there, frozen, for a full 10 seconds. I could practically see the error messages flashing behind her eyes as her brain tried to process the scene. The confusion slowly melted away, replaced by disbelief, which then curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. Her face, even from 30 feet away, was a thundercloud. She marched to the edge of her property line, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. She stopped just short of setting foot on my lawn, as if an invisible force field separated her world of order from my new oasis of chaos. "What is that?" she screeched. Her voice cut through the gentle babbling of the water like a chainsaw. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I ambled over, picking up a rake I had left nearby, and leaning on it with an air of practiced nonchalance. "Oh, this?" I said, gesturing to the glowing, gurgling monument behind me. "Just rectifying the gutter issue you were so concerned about. Per your letter. The water is now being managed in a controlled, and I think you'll agree, aesthetically pleasing manner. No more unsightly drip. You're welcome." Her jaw worked for a few seconds, but no sound came out. That is a monstrosity," she finally sputtered. It's a carnival ride. The noise, the lights, it's against the bylaws." "Ah, the bylaws," I said, wagging a finger. "An excellent point. I actually took the liberty of reading them. All 84 pages, including the appendices." It was a riveting read. "And you'll be happy to know, this is technically compliant. It's not a pond, as it has no standing water over 2 inches deep. It's not a structural modification, as it's not permanently attached to the foundation. And the lighting is low-voltage landscaping illumination, which is perfectly acceptable. I'd classify it as a decorative water feature. Very tranquil, don't you think?" "I am calling the city," she shrieked. "I am holding an emergency HOA meeting. You will be hearing from our lawyer." "You do that, Carol," I said with a serene smile. "You have a lovely evening now." She gave one last look of utter revulsion at my creation, spun on her heel, and stormed back into her house. Her door slammed shut with a force that I felt in my teeth. Silence descended, broken only by the gentle sound of my victory waterfall. Gus walked over, clapping me on the shoulder. "Kid, that was better than television. You enjoy this. But I got a feeling this ain't over." He was right. I was triumphant, basking in the blue-green glow of my success. But as Sarah came over and slipped her hand into mine, she gave the waterfall a worried look. "That was amazing," she whispered. "But Gus is right. You poked the bear, Mark." "I know," I said, watching the water dance over the rocks. "But you have to admit, it was worth it." The battle was won, but I could feel it in the air. The war for Oak Street had just begun. The days following the unveiling were a masterclass in passive aggression from my neighbor and active escalation from her alter ego, the HOA president. The waterfall, which my wife and I had affectionately nicknamed the Carol Falls, babbled on, a constant, gentle reminder of my victory. For Carol, it was clearly a monument to her defeat, and she could not let it stand. The official letters started again, arriving with unnerving regularity. The tone had shifted from sterile corporate speak to barely veiled panic. The first one, arriving that Friday, was a formal cease and desist order, accusing me of creating a nuisance. It cited a different bylaw, one about auditory harmony within the community. I promptly went out and bought a cheap decibel meter from an electronics store. The waterfall registered at a gentle 45 decibels from 10 feet away. Carol's oversized wind chimes, I was delighted to discover, peaked at a jarring 60 decibels whenever a slight breeze picked up. I took a video of my findings, for posterity. The next letter, which came on Monday, was even more creative. It claimed my unauthorized hydrostructure, as she now called it, was a potential breeding ground for mosquitoes and other vectors of disease, posing a direct health risk to the neighborhood. This was a new, more serious line of attack. The pièce de résistance arrived a few days later. In a letter co-signed by the HOA's secretary, a nervous-looking man named Gerald, whom I'm pretty sure Carol kept locked in her basement, I was accused of operating an unlicensed commercial water park on residential property and creating a light pollution hazard that could disorient migratory birds. I was almost impressed by her creativity. She was throwing every bylaw at the wall, hoping something would stick. The commercial water park accusation, in particular, made me laugh so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. The real escalation came on a Thursday night. I was watching TV when I saw the familiar flashing red and blue lights sweep across my living room wall. A police cruiser was parked at my curb. 2 officers were walking up my driveway. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. She actually did it. She called the cops on the Waterfall. "Stay calm," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "This is just part of her process." I opened the door to 2 officers. The older one had a weary, seen-it-all look on his face. The younger one looked like he was trying very hard not to smile. "Good evening, sir," the older officer said, his voice a tired monotone. "Are you the homeowner?" "I am," I said. "Is there a problem, officers?" "We received a call about a noise complaint," he said, glancing over my shoulder into the house, then gesturing with his head toward the side yard. "Something about some excessive water sounds?" "Ah, yes. My waterfall," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "It's for my anxiety. Doctor's orders. The gentle burbling has a calming effect on the nervous system." I did not have a doctor's order, but in that moment, it felt like the right thing to say. The younger officer coughed, turning his head to hide his smirk. The older one just sighed, a deep, profound sigh that spoke of years dealing with petty suburban squabbles. He looked over at Carol's house, where the curtains were definitely twitching. "Is this about the gutter thing?" he asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My jaw dropped. "You know about the gutter thing?" "Sir," he said, "we've been to this block 4 times in the last year for complaints originating from that house. Last time it was for unregulated holiday decorations on the Peterson house across the street. In July." He shook his head. "Right. Well, your anxiety feature sounds nice. It's actually pretty quiet. City ordinance on noise doesn't kick in until 10 p.m. anyway. Just try to, turn down your anxiety before then. Have a good night, sir." They turned and walked back to their car, the younger one finally letting a chuckle escape. It was a massive victory. The law itself had deemed my waterfall to be inoffensive. But the mosquito letter still bothered me. It was a legitimate concern, however maliciously intended. So I decided to fight fire with foliage. The next day, I called a landscaper. Not just any landscaper, but one whose van I'd seen, painted with flowers and peace signs, bearing the name Gaia's Gardens. Luna arrived in a flurry of tie-dye and patchouli oil. She was a woman in her 40s, with long gray-streaked hair and a serene smile. When she saw the Carol Falls, she didn't laugh. Her eyes lit up. "Whoa," she breathed, her hands clasped together. "The energy here is amazing. What a creative use of chai flow." "I was just trying to annoy my neighbor," I admitted. "The universe works in mysterious ways," she said sagely. I explained the mosquito accusation. Her expression turned serious. A disruption of the natural balance. We can't have that. She spent the afternoon transforming the area around the waterfall. She planted citronella, lavender, marigolds, and mint, creating a fragrant, pest-repelling fortress. She called it my aromatic shield. Then she pulled something from her van, wrapped in a blanket. "I feel like this space is calling for a guardian," she said, unveiling a small stone gargoyle. It was endearingly ugly, with a goofy, open-mouthed expression. "I can rig a small tube so he spits water back into the main flow. A protector of the falls." It was perfect. It was the single tackiest, most wonderful addition I could imagine. An hour later, the gargoyle was perched on a slate outcropping, cheerfully spitting a tiny stream of water. It elevated the entire project from petty to performance art. The neighborhood was now officially divided. Dave from next door loved it. He'd bring a beer over in the evenings, and we'd sit on the patio, just listening to it. The Peterson family from across the street, victims of the July Christmas lights incident, gave me a thumbs up every time they drove by. But others, the ones who were members of Carol's inner circle at the HOA, would slow down as they passed my house, their faces masks of disapproval. My little hydro-aesthetic statement had become a suburban Rorschach test. You either saw a clever joke or a heinous crime. And for Carol, it had become a declaration of war that she was determined to win, no matter how many city services she had to misuse to do it. The summons arrived, as all of Carol's communiques did, taped to my front door. This one, however, felt different. It was thicker, enclosed in a manila envelope. The tone was no longer threatening. It was procedural. It was an official notice for an emergency meeting of the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association. It was to be held the following Tuesday in the multi-purpose room of the local community center. The sole item on the agenda, to discuss and vote upon the mandatory removal of the unauthorized hydrostructure and levy of maximum fines for non-compliance at 123 Oak Street. This was it, the final showdown. She was done with letters and complaints. She was bringing out the heavy artillery, public opinion, and binding HOA votes. "She's trying to publicly shame us," Sarah said, reading the notice over my shoulder. "She's bringing a knife to a gunfight," I replied, a surge of adrenaline sharpening my focus. "And she doesn't know that I've been stockpiling ammunition." I immediately called my co-conspirator. "Gus," I said when he answered. "It's Mark. We're going to court." "HOA court?" he chuckled. "I'll bring my tool belt. Might need to intimidate some folks." The next few days were a flurry of preparation. Gus and I huddled in my garage, which we had converted into a makeshift war room. It was absurd, and we knew it, which only made it more fun. We weren't just homeowners, we were a scrappy legal team preparing for the trial of the century. Gus, with his gruff common sense, was the lead counsel. I was the star witness and paralegal. Our evidence was meticulously compiled. We had Exhibit A, the original letter from Carol. Exhibit B, large, glossy, beautifully lit photos of the Carol Falls, including several close-ups of the gargoyle, who we'd named Gary. Exhibit C was my video proving Carol's wind chimes were louder than my waterfall. Exhibit D was a signed, notarized statement from Luna of Gaia's Gardens, testifying that the area was now a certified mosquito-free zone of aromatic tranquility. But I had an ace up my sleeve. I had spent an entire afternoon at the county records office. The HOA meeting minutes and violation records were, technically, public documents, for a tour's nominal copying fee. I had obtained the records for the past 2 years. It was a treasure trove. It was the smoking gun. The night of the meeting, the multi-purpose room was buzzing. About 30 neighbors were there, seated in uncomfortable stacking chairs arranged in neat rows. It was a mix of familiar faces. Dave, my ally, gave me a reassuring nod. The Petersons smiled warmly, but there were also plenty of Carol's loyalists who stared at me as if I had personally lowered their property values. At the front of the room was a long folding table. Carol sat in the center, flanked by the nervous secretary, Gerald, and a stern-looking treasurer. She wielded her gavel like a queen holding her scepter. She began the meeting with a sharp rap of the gavel. "This emergency meeting is now in session," she announced, her voice dripping with manufactured solemnity. "We are here to discuss a grave threat to our community's aesthetic integrity." She then launched into a PowerPoint presentation. It was a masterpiece of melodrama. The title slide, in a font that looked like dripping blood, read, "The Suburban Blight." It featured grainy, zoomed-in photos of my waterfall, taken at night, making the lights look harsh and alien. She spoke of flagrant disregard for the rules, potential structural water damage, and the ever-present mosquito menace. She painted me as a rogue homeowner, a rebel without a cause who threatened to drag their pristine suburban paradise into a tacky, gurgling abyss. When she finished, a smug, confident smile was plastered on her face. "The committee moves to fine the homeowner of 123 Oak Street, the maximum allowable amount of $1,000, and to mandate the immediate, complete removal of the structure within 48 hours. All in favor?" "Point of order," I called out, standing up before anyone could raise their hands. Carol glared at me. "You are not recognized, Mr. "Actually," I said, walking to the front and placing my folder on the table. "According to Bylaw 24, Section F, the homeowner at the center of a dispute is allowed a 10-minute rebuttal. I'll be taking that now." A murmur went through the crowd. Carol, cornered by her own beloved rules, had no choice but to seethe silently and nod. I didn't use a PowerPoint. I just spoke. "Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark from 123 Oak Street. And this," I said, holding up a beautiful photo of Gary the Gargoyle spitting water amidst a sea of lavender, "is the suburban blight we're here to discuss." A few people chuckled. I had them. "Now, President Peterson, has raised some concerns. Let's address them. Noise?" I played the video on my phone, holding it up for all to hear. First, the gentle babble of the falls, then the loud, clanging racket of her wind chimes. "As you can hear, the waterfall is quieter than a breezy afternoon on Carol's porch. Mosquitoes?" I held up Luna's notarized statement. "An expert landscaper has declared it a fortress of pest-repelling flora. The blight, as she calls it, is actually protecting us from West Nile." I could see the tide turning. People were nodding, whispering to each other. I had dismantled her case. Now it was time for the masterstroke. "But this isn't really about a waterfall, is it?" I said, my voice becoming more serious. "It's about the rules. I agree, the rules are important. They're supposed to maintain harmony. But in the wrong hands, they can become weapons." I opened my folder. I was curious, so I did a little research. In the last 2 years, the Sunny Meadows HOA, under President Peterson's leadership, has issued 53 official violation notices. I paused to let that sink in. 53. Now, you might think our neighborhood is just full of scofflaws, but let's look at some of these grave threats. The Petersons, I said, nodding to them, received a notice for unauthorized wreath placement during a non-holiday month for a floral wreath on their door. In May, the Garcias got one for having a basketball hoop that was not stored in a completely invisible location. The Hendersons were cited for excessively vibrant petunias. A wave of recognition and anger rippled through the room. A man in the back stood up. She fined me because my garbage can was visible from the street for 1 hour after the truck came. A woman near the front chimed in. She sent me a letter about my kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk. The room erupted. It was a revolution in beige. Story after story of petty tyranny came pouring out. Carol's face went from pale to beet red. She banged her gavel, but it was useless. She had lost the room. After a few minutes, I held up my hands for quiet. My waterfall wasn't a violation. It was a response. It was a creative solution to a ridiculous problem. And I think it's time we, as a community, stand up to this kind of nitpicking nonsense that turns neighbors against each other. I looked at Carol. Her smugness was gone, replaced by a look of utter defeat. I believe there's a motion on the floor, I said, returning to my seat. To find me and tear down my hydrostructure. Someone from the crowd called out, "I call the question." Carol, her voice a weak rasp, asked, "All in favor of the motion?" Not a single hand went up. "All opposed?" Nearly every hand in the room shot up, a forest of defiant fists. Dave pumped his in the air. The motion didn't just fail. It was annihilated. The meeting was over. The war was won. The days following the HOA meeting were blissfully, profoundly quiet. The stream of letters taped to my door stopped. The twitching curtains in Carol's window ceased. When I saw her getting her mail, she wouldn't make eye contact. She'd just scurry back inside, a general whose army had deserted her on the field of battle. The Waterfall, my co-conspirator in this suburban drama, babbled on, its gentle gurgling no longer a sound of defiance, but a soothing soundtrack of victory. The neighborhood had changed. There was a new sense of camaraderie among those of us who had felt the sting of Carol's overzealous reign. The Petersons dropped off a bottle of wine. The Garcias, whose basketball hoop was now proudly displayed at the end of their driveway, offered to help if I ever needed to trim the oak tree. My little act of malicious compliance had accidentally become a catalyst for community. About a month after the meeting, the ultimate symbol of surrender appeared on Carol's lawn, a for sale sign. I won't say I gloated, but I may have raised my morning coffee mug in a silent, triumphant toast in its direction. To celebrate our collective liberation, I threw a backyard barbecue. It felt right. I invited everyone who had spoken up at the meeting or offered a quiet word of support. Dave came over with a six-pack. Gus showed up with a cooler full of suspiciously strong homemade sausages, and Luna arrived with a wind chime made of polished agate that she claimed would harmonize the yard's new energy. The waterfall was the guest of honor. People gathered around it, admiring it. Gary the gargoyle had become a local celebrity. Kids would come by to watch him spit water. What began as a monument to my own spite had become a beloved landmark. It was a testament to the idea that sometimes the most absurd solutions are the best ones. "You know," Gus said, leaning against the deck railing with a sausage in hand, "I've been fixing gutters for 30 years. This is the first one that ever made people happy. You might be onto a new business model, kid." "I don't think the world is ready for Gus and Mark's spiteful water gardens," I laughed. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the yard, I excused myself for a moment. I had one final touch to add. I walked over to the falls, a small package in my hand. I unwrapped it and revealed a small, professionally engraved bronze plaque. I had ordered it online the day after the meeting. I used a tube of heavy-duty construction adhesive to mount it onto a large, flat rock near the base of the waterfall, right next to Gary. My guests gathered around to see what I was doing. Luna read the inscription aloud. "The Carroll Memorial Falls Est. 225. Let every drip find its purpose." The yard erupted in laughter. It was the perfect, petty, and somehow poignant final chapter to the saga. It wasn't mean-spirited. It was a humorous acknowledgement of the ridiculous journey we'd all been on. A memorial to the conflict that had, strangely, brought us all a little closer. The story ends, as it began, with me on my patio. It's a Saturday morning, a few months later. A new family is moving into Carol's old house. A young couple with a kid who is already running through the sprinklers on the lawn. My coffee is warm in my hands. The air smells of cut grass and possibility. The gentle sound of my waterfall fills the air. A constant, peaceful, gurgling reminder that peace isn't always about the absence of conflict. Sometimes it's about the peace you win. It's about standing up to petty tyrants, not by sinking to their level, but by building something so wonderfully, beautifully, and compliantly absurd that it breaks their will to fight. I looked over at the empty house next door, then back at my magnificent, ridiculous, illuminated, gargoyle-guarded waterfall. I raised my mug. "To Carol," I said to myself with a grin, "wherever you are, I hope your new gutters are immaculate."